Welcome to the Standard of Truth podcast. In this podcast, Dr. Garrett Dirkmott and Professor Richard Leduc explore the early history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the life and teachings of Prophet Joseph Smith. They examine the original historical sources and provide context for events of the past. They approach the history of the Church with faith, expertise, and humor.
Hi, welcome to another episode of the Standard of Truth podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Garrett Dirkmott, and I'm joined by my friend, Professor Richard Leduc.
Hello, Garrett. In this week's episode, we respond to a listener's email that lit me up a little bit. She called me to the carpet.
Now, when you say lit you up, was this kind of like a you were caught smoking in middle school type of a thing?
No. She took umbrage with something that I had said, and I think
even the word umbrage is...
Well, and I think she's expecting something kind of conciliatory here, where I comment.
Well, let me ask the question. Were you wrong?
I was not wrong.
Okay, so that one of the things about making a reconciliation is someone at some point has to admit.
Not only was I not wrong, I couldn't have been more right. As almost PhD Richard, I am at my most arrogant right now.
So weren't you initially in your first class of your PhD program, you had all of your hubris beaten out of you, right?
Oh, I felt like I couldn't have possibly have known less. I felt like an idiot.
It was funny. Like you even felt bad about things that had nothing to do with business PhDs. You're like, I'm a terrible father.
That had always been the case, but yes. And so this is maximum arrogant me. I mean, I had a meeting with my dissertation committee just this week, and things seem to be going well. They like the direction of some of it. Although one of the people on the committee said that she thought that my idea was cute. I don't know that.
Wow.
That's necessarily. Other than that comment, that it went really,
you have a very
really well.
Cute idea.
Yeah.
Richard, I think you need to start considering the fact that you may not be getting a PhD.
It's likely.
Yeah.
Well, that, Richard, will be very conciliatory.
Right. But
not this one.
But our listener,
yes.
Do we have a name for our listener?
Janet.
Janet. Now, that's a fairly common name.
It is.
So there are, of our hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of listeners
named Janet.
How many Janets? Well, look, we found out how many Bills there are when I casually said Bill was a fornicator.
Adulterer, I believe.
Adulterer. Not fornicator?
Well, I mean, that implies, but also adulterer seems worse. You've made additional promises.
We need you to email us and let us know exactly how we slandered you.
Here's the subject for that email, by the way. By the way, just at the very beginning, we love Janet. Janet is wonderful.
A friend of yours?
Janet's, yeah. And you, sir, are no Janet.
You know that you're on brand when your go-to joke is something from the 1992 vice presidential debate. Is that where we're at? Is that what it was?
Yeah, that's
okay,
right.
Good.
That's right.
Yeah, Mr. Quayle.
Yeah. Richard, you are such a fine young man. That's the subject.
Well, that's a kind thing.
That is, it's.
Do you think she's patting you on the head?
It's written
there?
with, it's written with a tone.
She wrote it in blood.
My dear Richard, I was on my walk this morning listening to the usual banter at the beginning. Let's face it, the first 15 minutes.
Oh boy,
that's very funny.
Boy, we just played right
into
president. We just played right into her hands.
It's true. I lose for most of this, but I feel I'm going to win in the end.
I don't think so.
Okay. Of the latest used car salesman episode. So first of all, Janet's a premium subscriber. So obviously I'm going to be far kinder and more deferential as we appreciate that.
This is a really great episode. If you were thinking, when should I get the premium content? We talk about Johann Tetzel, the peddler of indulgences, who's selling people millions of less years in purgatory.
Yeah, it's actually one of my favorites. Most of our premium episodes are garbage, but that one was so good.
There are premium episodes that I'm embarrassed of. No, I'm just kidding. But it's about the beginning of the Reformation, and so it's a very important part.
Right, and I talk about how I think the name of the episode is something like Johann Tetzel, used car salesman or something.
Yeah, Johann Tetzel, with a seersucker suit And he's like, what's it going to take to get you into an indulgence? How would you like to get out of purgatory?
Yes. And so in that, Garrett, I was here minding my own business, watching college football games while Garrett was talking about, religious history things. And Garrett pointed out a pet peeve that he said that I have when people call area authority 70s, general authority 70s, right? And I wasn't planning to speak about that. I thought I had said all these things in confidence.
Right. Well, I broke confidence.
And so to be very clear.
Now, Richard loves area 70s.
Of course. Yeah. Of course, they're wonderful. When they come and speak in state conference, they're great. They occasionally will come. And
we don't have any area 70s listening.
Of course we don't.
If we do, we're about to get a call from our state president.
No, I mean, so yeah, area authority 70s are wonderful. And when they speak in general conference, they're usually incredible.
It's honestly
speakers.
been one of the greatest innovations in the church in my lifetime. The creation of the area authority 70s.
Right. So this happened in 1995. It's announced in April of 1995 by President Hinckley.
I remember. It's crazy.
70s.
I mean, I remember literally President Hinckley talking and announcing it. And even as a teenager, it was exhilarating that we were going to have what? We're not going to have 2 quorums of the 70, but I was going to have 90 quorums eventually.
Well, we have 12 now.
I know, but
5.
the idea was it just can expand.
I totally got away from her email. I need to get back.
Oh, yeah,
I'm starting to be super defensive. I haven't even finished her point
yet.
yet.
You are very defensive of something we haven't even read yet.
All right. When the banter turned to what you were saying you consider a general authority and an area authority. And I have to confess, I lost all focus on the real content because of the conversation I was having with you in my head. Now, I know Garrett would like to keep the standard of truth as close to the truth as possible. Janet, you have no idea how wrong that statement is. So I'm going to put forth what I believe is a little truth, which is probably closer to the truth than your truth. Staying consistent with the confession mode, I am close to 3/4 of a century old. If I know I shouldn't be confessing such things, but in this case I must. And my mother was born in 1916, which was a little while ago. So what I'm trying to get at is I probably have close to a doctorate in this information, but at the very least,
she's ABD,
maybe a master's since I was there.
That's awesome.
And my parents go a bit further back. Now, I don't know when the term general authority began to be used or who it was that coined it, but I give you, in all caps, the challenge, Richard, not Garrett, to research this and report back. Now, there is more. Here I will read in a second, but Janet, Garrett did all the research on this. So,
you could have pretended that you did it.
Yeah, but as that now, we're leading with the truth here. I just wanted to let her know. I mean, if you want me to report back, I'm just going to, make some stuff up.
Okay, all right, there we go.
Yeah, right. At any rate, this is how general authority was used long before you were born. Anyone above a stake president has always been referred to as a general authority. Subcategories of general authorities are 70s, area authorities, current title, notice the capitalization here, and apostles and prophets. The area authorities used to be called assistants to the 12, just a different title for these general authorities. And before that, I'm not sure. I believe they just called brethren to help out the 12 without setting them apart. After you report back from your research, she's giving me an assignment.
I like how she thinks you're going to do this.
Well, and I did. You did.
Wait, what part of it did you do?
I drove to your house.
That's long ways.
It is.
The traffic's terrible
from Layton. Oh, yeah, it was Labor Day weekend. We'll all be better informed, but it better be true truth. Though I live in Utah, I didn't grow up here. When anyone came from state conference, it was a big deal. And I'm sure it still is for many folks outside of Utah, Idaho, yes, I know, and Arizona. Well, so first of all, Janet, as an aside, growing up in, Nampa,
the
Idaho.
rich side of Idaho.
Well, Nampa, Idaho, our stake was kind of between Nampa and Kuna, Idaho. That's where we were. And I don't remember seeing any sort of general authority until I was in high school. We had General Authority 70, which was a general authority.
Be careful.
Which was a general authority. Oh, he was great. He came.
I'm just saying, are you sure he was a general authority?
100%, because this was pre-1995.
Okay.
So he came, he spoke. It was awesome. I was, I believe, 16 the first time I ever saw a general authority speak. And it was, other than General Conference, which I will admit as a young man, I regularly did not pay attention to as often or as much as I should. So it was a really big deal to be able to see a general authority for the first time. It was awesome. I loved it. It was an incredible thing. All right, moving on. Chances are you probably still want to continue to say what is untrue. But I've got... Wow. I know.
Well,
she's coming at me.
First of all, she knows you.
Yeah, I know. Seriously.
Yeah.
Wait, is Becky writing this?
Yeah, exactly. Becky, is your pseudonym possibly Janet?
Yeah.
Like, do you write under the name?
But I've got history as my credentials, so I believe my truth is more true than yours. Love you guys. Keep me laughing and learning, but don't forget, Richard, I'm right. Cheers.
Wow. She came gunning for you.
She did.
You know what I like, though?
I like all of it, actually.
I like the fact that, like a hyena doesn't go after the strongest, wildebeest pack. Like we could go after. Well,
she came after me.
That's what I'm
the
saying.
weak, sickly antelope.
She could have
Sure. I've got gangrene in one leg. I went to a watering hole, got the other leg bit off by a crocodile.
Yeah,
a spiritual crocodile.
Yeah, we could do a whole one on Boyd K. Packer as well, but yeah,
that's great.
That was a great email.
I'm the sickly antelope that she's going. Well, yeah. So here's the thing, though, Janet.
He will not yield.
Well, so here's the thing: is that there was a significant change that we talked about a little bit as I interrupted your email in 1995 when President Hinckley makes the change and announces Area Authority 70. And that general authorities are the first and second quorum of the 70, and that at the time, the third, fourth, and fifth quorum of the 70 were Area 70 that lived in a particular geographical location and then served in that general area. We're now up to 12 areas, 70 quorums, or 12 quorums of the 70, with the first two as general authorities. And so the reason that I talked about it is there is actually a pretty significant difference in the responsibility between an Area 70 and a General Authority 70. So not to take anything away from any area authority, I
feel like
ever,
this entire podcast has been bad-mouthing Area Authority 70. That's how Janet took it.
That is not it at all. So
well, let me just speak to what Janet talked about in part of her email on the assistance to the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. So this is something that is in the 20th century. There are several men called beginning in 1941 to be special assistants to the 12, and they do actually have general authority power. And they are often assigned certain geographic roles. Now they're not called 70, they're called assistants to the 12. And there are some pretty big names that are assistants to the 12. Among them, President Hinckley. Well, he wasn't President Hinckley at the time, but
I expect good things from you, young man.
Yeah, exactly. Boyd K. Packer, we've already been noted. David B. Haight, James E. Faust, Neil A. Maxwell. It seems like this was an okay position to hold. They are going to last from 1941 until General Conference of 1976. And in 1976, President Kimball is going to explain essentially that some of the functions of the 70, the first quorum of the 70, some of those functions were essentially being replicated by these assistants to the 12 because they both had general authority power, and that he folds them back in he eliminates the office essentially and makes them general authority 70s. Since the functions and responsibilities, this is from the conference, since the functions and responsibilities of the assistants to the 12 and the 70 are similar, And since the accelerated worldwide growth of the church requires a consolidation of its administrative functions at the general level, the First Presidency and Quorum of the 12, with the concurrence of the assistants to the 12. So, hey, don't worry, we talked to these guys, which is funny. You remember when President Uchtdorf just became Elder Uchtdorf again? Just one of the members of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. How many people were so upset because he had been President Uchtdorf? Because they saw serving in the First Presidency like serving up the ladder in a local fast food chain.
Well, but
like you can't go from being the assistant manager to being the assistant deputy manager.
So the issue though is with President Hinckley and President Monson serving in their roles as long as they did, it had been years and years and years of that. So people hadn't gone back.
So their lived religious experience was anyone who's in the First Presidency not only is in the First Presidency forever, but they actually are often the ones on the day-to-day level running things in the church because the prophet is sick, or, you know, with both President Kimball and President Benson, and then even with President Hunter, there was considerable illness that made them, you know, even appearing in General Conference difficult. And so in many ways, our view of the First Presidency is much more enhanced because of our experience. Now, look, they still are the First Presidency, hold the keys, right? But in Joseph Smith's time, the First Presidency was a very different office. And it was a different office in part because everyone serving in the First Presidency were actually not members of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. Sidney Rigdon was not a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. John C. Bennett, thank goodness that I can say the words John C. Bennett was not an apostle. Those are some of the most important words anyone's ever said. William Law is not a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. Now, over the course of time, the First Presidency will always be drawn from the Quorum of the 12. And so those things shift and change over time. So, I mean, in Janet's email where she says, you know, there used to be assistants to the 12 and they had general authority power. Well, you're right. If an assistant to the 12 showed up at your ward, wherever you're from, you said you're not from Utah, then yeah, that would have been a gigantic deal. It would have been someone with general authority power coming to speak to the church. And so maybe I thought, maybe trace a little bit where this terminology comes from. Now, look, I am not a language expert. For those of you listening to the podcast, you're well aware I'm not even very good at speaking English, period. Now, on the bright side, when I do make a mistake, we stop the recording, we cut it out, and then whenever Richard makes a mistake,
keep it in.
We leave it in.
That's right.
Because the aforementioned gangrenous antelope.
I love the visual of that.
Yeah.
Just limping along, waiting for death.
No eyes, you're blind, one horn's crooked, you know. The hyenas are looking for something easy.
So they attack me misspeaking on area authorities, which, again, I didn't.
Okay, well, you and Janet are going to have to meet a high dude. So the interesting thing is, of course, this is a terminology, general authority, meaning what it does. It kind of develops over time. Now, you want to know, when is it first used? What's really interesting is Section 102 is going to be an important section for all of the councils of the church, but it's especially important because it outlines the functions, duties, and powers of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles when they are first called. Now, if you recall back so many podcasts ago, back when the world was new, when Richard's gangrenous hoof was not yet ready to take the rest of his leg, we did a podcast where we talked about when the Quorum of the 12 was actually first created. And it's not until February of 1835 that the Quorum of the 12 is called. Well, when they are initially called, they are called and given a type of, now, like, no one's using the word general authority yet, but they're given a type of power that is almost general authority. They're given this power where they have the ability to settle doctrine, to call people, to settle disputes. They represent the church everywhere outside of the seat of government of the church. Meaning the Quorum of the 12, when they were initially called, didn't really have ecclesiastical power in Kirtland, but they did have it everywhere else. So if you're in a branch in Michigan, the Quorum of the 12, they're going to be the ones who settle the questions that you have. Now, in fact, in your if you turn to Doctrine and Covenants section 102 and drop down to verses 30 through 32, these are verses that are not part of the original minutes. So D&C 102 are the minutes of a church council that are canonized, and they're published in the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants. But this meeting was held in 1834, before the Quorum of the 12 Apostles was called. And so you have this whole thing explaining especially some of the appellate abilities of people being able to appeal councils when they've been brought into council for some kind of sin. In fact, maybe we'll just read a little bit of this. The high priest, when abroad, have power to call and organize a council. This is verse 24 of section 102. The high priest, when abroad, have a power to call and organize a council after the manner of the foregoing to settle difficulties when the parties of either of them shall request it. And the said council of high priests shall have power to appoint one of their own number to preside over such a council for the time being. It shall be the duty of said council to transmit immediately a copy of their proceedings with a full statement of the testimony accompanying their decision to the high council of the seat of the first presidency of the church. So now notice again, there's a standing high council in the early church that is set up to be wherever the first presidency is, or the seat of government of the church as it's referred to. Okay, so you have a bunch of missionaries that are preaching in New York, and there's someone in New York who says, hey, Bill slandered me and said that I was a gangrenous antelope with hyenas chasing after me. And they call essentially an ad hoc council to try to settle the affair. They are not a traveling council. It's essentially a council called together of people who, have the high priesthood who can then, determine what's going on here. But their decision is then sent back to the standing high council at the seat of government of the church. So we're in Michigan. Someone's claiming someone's a gangrenous antelope. Someone else is claiming that the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo didn't really matter that much in American history. Someone else is claiming that rice tariffs are uninteresting. And the dispute's got to be settled. They make their dispute. You know what? Bill is wrong about this. In addition to being an adulterer, Bill also is a slanderer. And then they send their decision with all of the testimony. They send it to the church headquarters so that the church headquarters have that. Should the parties of either of them be dissatisfied with the decision of said council, they may appeal to the high council of the seat of the first presidency of the church and have a rehearing, which case shall there be conducted according to the former pattern written, as though no decision had been made. So in the early church court system, what's set up in this 1834 minutes is an appellate system where if, you have a dispute over some milk strippings, that it can go further up the line. That's another podcast.
That's Apostles and Apostates Part 2.
And apothecaries.
Apostles, Apostates, and Apothecaries Part 2.
Yeah. I had a good friend say to me, hey, I think I know the other A word you were looking for. But
it was apothecary.
Apothecary. That's what I said. Obviously, it's some kind of a pharmacist. They could appeal and have a rehearing as if there wasn't even a settled thing. So it was completely redone case. Incidentally, this is a practice that is followed well into the 20th century in Utah. The Salt Lake Stake, which is the high council of the seat of government of the church, the high council of where the first presidency is, had appellate jurisdictional authority over other high councils in the church. Isn't that an interesting thing? Yeah. Well, at any rate, this was 1834. And you've got your standing high council, and then you have these kind of ad hoc councils of elders when they're abroad, basically, this kind of thing. Like, what do you do when there's a problem with the church somewhere that's outside of Kirtland? And then the Quorum of the 12 Apostles is called in February of 1835. So before D&C 102 is published in the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants, so it's published later that year, Joseph Smith makes emendations to this revelation. It's really the minutes of a meeting that is revealed. And he adds these verses. If you go to, let me finish reading the part. This is not the added part. Verse 28. The Council of High Priests abroad is only to be called on the most difficult cases of church matters, and no common or ordinary case is to be sufficient to call such a council. Again, slandering someone probably isn't, right? Someone claiming that they are the real prophet, maybe that is kind of a big deal. The traveling or located high priests abroad have power to say whether it's necessary to call a council or not. So one of the things written in there is, look, Bill saying that John stole his hammer is not enough for us to call a traveling high priest abroad council. So the verses that are added are verse 30 through 32, because the Quorum of the 12 Apostles are essentially a permanent traveling high council with this kind of general authority. And this is what's added. There is a distinction between the high council or the traveling high priest abroad and the traveling high council composed of the 12 apostles in their decisions. From the decision of the former, there can be an appeal, but from the decision of the latter, there cannot. Okay, so you notice a very big difference. If it's just a bunch of high priests in Michigan that hear my case and I think it was judged wrongly, I can appeal that decision. But the Quorum of the 12 are a much higher council. They're not an ad hoc council. They aren't just people like, hey, Jim, you're a high priest, right? Could you come serve on this? There's not that. Incidentally, we still, people who will be brought in as additional members to high councils when they can't form a full high council even now.
I've served in some councils where that was the case. They didn't have their full high council.
Could you explain that so that maybe, don't.
Well, so this is what the guy did.
Don't tell us what happened or where it happened or what's going on. But just as an explanation, how is it that as not a member of the high council, you were serving in that role?
Right. So I having served in a bishopric, was a high priest.
Janet, this is going to be pretty disappointing to you that Richard's been in a bishopric. Several times.
I may have said this. I may have said this already on the podcast. If not, this is my favorite quote of anything I've ever heard in my life. We were living in Clearfield, Utah. We just moved to Utah, and the patriarch was for the Clearfield stake was speaking in stake conference, and he said, sometimes people ask me, how could I serve in leadership? How could I, serve as a bishop or something like that? Like, and first of all, who in the world is signing up for that?
Yeah.
Like, look, if you're called, you do it, but who is signing up for it anyway? So, he said, I often tell people, if you want to serve in leadership, the key is to move to a place without a lot of talent.
Yeah.
And that's the funniest thing I think I've ever heard.
And you followed those instructions.
I followed those instructions, and that's how I served in a bishopric. So, anyway, as having been a high priest, they had, at the time it was still called a disciplinary council, and the stake president reached out to me and gave me a call and said, hey, we're doing this disciplinary council, and we're only going to have 10 members of the high council that'll be there, and we'd like for you to come and serve on the high council as a high priest that serves in that capacity. So I wasn't on the high council, but sat in that particular meeting.
Essentially as an ad hoc member, as
yes.
if you were a member of the high council.
Correct.
Right? But not actually a member of the high council.
No, certainly not.
He can be a member of the bishopric, but a member of the high council, he cannot. The reason why I bring this up is not only is it important to talk about where the apostles' authority begins, and of course Joseph's going to keep giving them more and more and more authority until, as we learned on the final charge, so
we're kind of working backwards.
We are
final charge, and now we're
we're going to start with
charge.
We're going to start with President Nelson, and then we're going to work our way back to we might eventually get to Joseph Smith. Again, verse 32, the latter can only be called into question by the general authorities of the church in case of transgression. So notice that. So one of the interesting things is the first time it's mentioned in Scripture, that term general authority is surrounding this higher power, actually, that the latter. So a decision made by the apostles can only be called into question by the general authorities of the church in the case of transgression. So now, even though it says that, it is not a regular thing for that term to be used in the church. So even though you have this in an 1835 document, it still is a relatively rare usage. In 1838, you have a conference that is held in Far West, and it's going to use this same type of phraseology. And this is a conference from April 7th of 1838. Agreeable to a resolution of the High Council assembled at Far West on Saturday, the 3rd of March, 1838, the general authorities of the church met to hold the first quarterly conference of the Church of the Latter-day Saints. Remember, that was before we had our name change. And it lists off President Joseph Smith Jr., Sidney Rigdon, Thomas B. Marsh, David W. Patton, and Brigham Young took the stand. After which the several quorums, the High Council, the High Priest, the 70s, and the elders. So you get this terminology, but you don't get this very great definition of it. Why does that matter? Because we use it, exclusively. It is not hard to know what we mean when we say the word general authority in the church today. It's very well spelled out. But in the early church, that terminology is not used as readily. Let me give you an example from 1856. Franklin D. Richards is talking about a conference that they hold in England. Okay, it's in Birmingham, England, and he's using this phraseology that today would seem a little bit out of place. He says, before leaving England on the 26th of July, and this is 1856 that he's giving this. Before leaving England on the 26th of July, I had the pleasure of welcoming brothers Pratt and Benson to that interesting and important field of labor. We had a joyful conference at Birmingham and a council of the general authorities of the church in those countries. Those brethren expressed themselves very satisfactorily and cheeringly as to the condition in which they received the work at our hands. Here, you'll notice he's using general in the exact opposite way to meaning common. The common authorities, not authority that is everywhere, general meaning that it's authority that goes everywhere, but rather the more common church authorities is the way that he is using that, or at least appears to be using that in this instance. There is, it seems like Erastus Snow is one of the people that really kind of pushes this to be more of the nomenclature for it to be a general authority to mean something. Talking about the leadership of the church. What he's talking about is that people shouldn't show up in Utah expecting the leaders of the church to just feed them all the time, that they like need to bring food and also grow crops and stuff. And he says they look to the fathers of their ward, for Brother Brigham having set the example so many times, for he says, I'm not going to continue to do it. They may pick up the responsibility on the bishop to take a little oversight of their wards without throwing it on Brother Brigham and the general authorities of this church. That is to say, they need not to expect the general authorities of this church to bear this people in their bosoms and exercise all thought for them, for that portion that don't think for themselves. There he seems to be, combining it with Brigham Young. He seems to be talking about the general leadership of the church there, right? Not just a local bishop in Birmingham, England, right? So you can see that's only 2 years later. That's 1838 that you're getting that. Even more directly, a few years later, it's again Erastus Snow in 1879, who is going to describe this terminology, general authority, in a pretty familiar way, again, in General Conference. He is going to say, and for the same, I'm obviously taking part of this, and for the same reason, those who officiate in the more extended spheres, such as presidents of stakes, high counselors, and all stake authorities, are put before the people in their several stakes in conference assembled for their approval, their confidence, and support. Otherwise, their appointment has not the same force and effect upon the people. In like manner, those who may be selected by the working of the Holy Spirit through the proper authorities to preside over quorums are nominated for this calling and are submitted to the members for their sanction and confidence. And then come the general authorities, who preside over and minister in the affairs of the church in all the earth. These general quorums are not local and are not limited to any particular stake or quorum. Their business is to see that the gospel is preached to the whole world, to impart counsel by the spirit of revelation according to the spirit of their apostleship and calling, and special witnesses and messengers to the world of mankind. These are the first presidency, and the 12 apostles and the 70s whose calling and duty it is to labor under the direction of the 12 and to bear the gospel to all nations and to regulate the affairs of the church in all the world. These general authorities are therefore brought before the general conference assembled for their approval and for them to uphold and sustain by their faith and prayers, and in like manner they are presented at the several state conferences. That's 1879. It's a pretty good explanation, isn't it? Where he explains there are local authorities. Those local authorities are called by general church authorities. But what makes someone a general authority is they preside over and minister in the affairs of the church in all the earth. They are not local. They are not limited to any particular stake or quorum. I think you can use that definition today almost.
You can. So like, as an example, a bishop has a geographical area, a stake president has a geographical area, and an area authority has a geographical area, where a general authority might be called to reorganize a stake in Texas or reorganize a stake in Canada. Or...
Right, but an area authority 70 is never going to be called outside of his area to reorganize a stake in a different area.
That's right. But they would be called to reorganize a stake in their area.
Right.
Because they still are a 70.
They're a 70 over that particular area. Now, I think one of the reasons why this becomes a little bit confusing is in addition to general authority 70, you're probably thinking, well, we're 40 minutes in. Yeah, confusing was 35 minutes ago. Confusing was the gangrenous antelope.
Well, that was the only thing you said that made any sense.
Well, that Janet saw weakness.
Yeah, and she pounced.
The one thing we know about Janet is if she sees weakness, you do not want to play a game of poker with her.
No,
she'll see that you're bluffing. She goes all in. We don't know anything about gambling.
No, but she'll get you on the flop.
Yeah, she'll get you. Well, she'll probably get you on the river. Actually, she'll wait. Yeah, she'll wait to get you on the river. There's also, of course, in the church now, area presidencies. So you have general authority 70s, and you also have area authority 70s. But then you also have area presidencies, which are over a much larger geographic area. And they include both general authority 70s and also area 70s. So you could have someone from your area presidency come to speak to you, and they may or may not be a general authority, have general authority power, even though they have all kinds of power in your area.
One of the beautiful things about this, so there's a great article from Elder
Bruce Tingey?
Earl C. Tingey.
Earl Tingey.
Earl C. Tingey about Area Authority 70s. This was in the formerly Ensign, currently Liahona, October 2002, where he talks about the how in Doctrine and Covenants section 107, how the Lord lays the groundwork for as the church grows and as it fills the whole earth, that this body of 70 is structured in such a way to allow for it to grow. The number of areas that we've had 29. I believe now we only have 23. And we used to have 5 quorums of the 70 when this was reorganized in 1995, and now we have 12. And so as the church continues to expand and grow and grow and grow, there's going to be changes, and that's the beauty of the inspiration behind the whole thing.
In a business world, scalability.
Yeah, right.
Is there some scalability here with our
scalable and repeatable processes that allow for sustained growth? That's correct.
And that's the main reason why you're getting your PhD.
100%.
To fully understand the growth of the 70, the office of the 70.
Yeah, so it's beautiful in the way that the Lord has structured and set this up to allow it to grow. However, there is a difference between the two. I think that's at the heart of what I'm saying.
I think the heart of what you're saying is that you want to be right.
I do. I so badly want to be right.
Yeah,
I have so few wins in my life. I need this so bad. Janet, would you just please give this to me?
We should. I mean, look, the terminology has changed a lot. I mean, I remember when we used to, I remember. It was like a week ago. I remember.
Congratulations.
I remember when we used to call them auxiliary presidencies.
And other organizations.
Right.
No longer auxiliaries, they're organizations.
Right. In fact, let's go to the fountain of all knowledge, and that's to the church itself. Let's go. No better person to tell you what it is that they think their organization means than to the person controlling the organization. And if you go to the church's website, you have this explanation that is on the page under called General Church Leadership. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints follows the same pattern as the church that Jesus Christ established during his mortal ministry, restored in modern times. He remains the head of the church and directs his chosen servants as they lead. The leaders of the worldwide church are known as general authorities and general officers. So you have that term general is now being used even outside of authority for general officers. General authorities include the first presidency, the quorum of the 12 apostles, general authority 70s, and the presiding bishopric. General officers include the general presidencies of the Relief Society, primary, Sunday school, young women, and young men organizations. The first presidency is the highest governing body of the church. Along with the quorum of the 12 apostles, members of the first presidency are special witnesses of Jesus Christ. They seek the Lord's guidance as they oversee the affairs of the church. General authorities, general officers, and other church leaders likewise seek divine guidance as they love and serve specific groups of church members throughout the world. So you get this very clear definition of what is considered a general authority. Obviously, these are all things that I'm never going to be, so I don't have to worry about, how exactly do I want my title elder to read? Do I have a middle initial? Does anyone know? But back to Richard's point, it is amazing how the Lord has established his church. It really is. And I got to tell you, as a historian watching, as I read, right, watching the unfolding of God calling Joseph and Oliver just as first and second elder, and then just a little bit more. One of Brigham Young's favorite phrases was God calling here a little and there a little bit here and a little bit there. He uses it over and over and over again to explain that God is unfolding the restoration right before our eyes. As President Nelson said, the restoration's ongoing. This is not a finished process. We have the church, and the best part about having a true and living church is that it changes. It's the best part about it. And yet, at the same time, it's one of the reasons why people lose their minds. Well, if the church isn't exactly the same as it was in 1847, then that proves that it's not being led by God anymore. Yeah, well, the church is being led by God when Lehi didn't live in Jerusalem anymore. I mean, the whole point in having the Lord lead the church is that the church then can receive inspiration to respond to the changing needs of the world. As the article Richard just cited, demonstrates, the point is the needs of the church change over time. Our membership, where they're at, changes over time. We have 1 million members in Mexico and 1 million members in Brazil, basically, at this point.
In 1995, when this was first announced, it was about 9 million members. 2 years later, it was about 10 million. The expansion has been incredibly dramatic over the past years.
And even in this era of rejection of faith, in an era where all you ever hear about is how nobody believes and everyone's becoming a non, right? Everyone's getting rid of religion, and they are fastly heading towards a secular world where God doesn't even exist. For all those stories that you hear, and look, we all have had painful experiences with loved ones we have that have walked away from the truth. The reality is, among churches, our church is still growing. Maybe not as quickly as it was, but it is rapidly growing. Hundreds of thousands of members in some places in Africa now. Hundreds of thousands in the space of a few decades. This church continues to expand. Now, there's going to be all kinds of headwinds, especially given the secular age that we live in. But to me, that's the great beauty of being a part of the Lord's church. That even in the organizational structure, the Lord makes it so that he can expand it when he needs to. He can draw it in when he needs to. He can make it more area specific when he needs to. And that's why we have a prophet. That's why we have a first presidency and a quorum of the 12 apostles, so that they can receive the revelation of how to best guide the church into the future. This question of who has authority to lead the church is sometimes at the very heart of not only apostates in the modern world, but apostates in the earlier ages of the church. And so on our next episode, one of the things we're going to talk about is a particular, he wasn't an apostle, he wasn't an apothecary,
but he was an apostate.
But he was an apostate. And it's going to actually relate to one of our listeners' questions, because his apostasy is a very specific thing where he's claiming that another aspect of church authority, another office, actually supersedes the office of an apostle. And now you're wondering, well, who is it? I'm pretty excited, right?
Yeah, everyone's on the edge of their seats. I did want to say, though, if I could, to Janet, whose email was very funny.
It was hilarious.
It was well written, very funny. It's almost as though she's a writer. It's almost as though.
Yeah, almost as though she's an experienced writer.
A very good,
well
and
known in the
accomplished.
Wasatch
Yes.
Front. Yeah,
and
interesting.
Yes, it was very.
She's a
funny.
lot better writer than we are.
Obviously. But that said, I will be putting in the description, there was, in April of this year, in the Church News, there was an article that was titled, "What is the difference between a General Authority 70 and an Area 70 and a General Officer?" How about that for timing?
Wow. Do you have a friend there that put that up for you?
I've got a friend at the church
news. At the church news department. Like, they didn't even run this article, but you said, I need you to put this up, and I need you to post-date it.
Jenna called me out. I need you to post-date it for April of 2023.
And the gangrenous antelope hobbles on.
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for listening to the Standard of Truth podcast, hosted by historian Dr. Garrett Dirkmaat. If you know anybody that could benefit from the material in this episode, please share it with them. And for more resources, visit standardoftruth.com. Until next time.